Tom and Jerry, a cartoon that looks innocent, playful, full of slapstick comedy. But beneath the surface, beneath the jokes, the chases, the laughter, there's something darker lurking, something unsettling, something that many viewers only recognize years later when they rewatch the series as adults. Because Tom and Jerry isn't just chaos, it isn't just comedy. At times, it's genuinely disturbing. Today we're diving deep into the most terrifying Tom and Jerry moments ever animated. Moments that feel completely out of place in a children's cartoon. Moments that stay with you long after the episode ends. Moments that might be hinting at something the animators were trying to express, even if they never edit out loud. From scenes that shocked audiences, to episodes that were pulled from television, to psychological horror hidden in plain sight. This is the dark side of Tom and Jerry, the side nobody warned you about. We'll explore the episodes that cross the line from slapstick into something much more sinister. We'll examine the animation techniques that accidentally created nightmare fuel. We'll uncover the historical context that explains why these scenes exist in the first place. And we'll ask the question that nobody seems to want to answer. Was Tom and Jerry ever really meant for children? By the end of this documentary, you'll never look at this classic cartoon the same way again. You'll understand why certain scenes have haunted viewers for decades. You'll see the hidden psychological experiments buried inside what appears to be simple entertainment. So settle in. Turn off the lights if you dare. Because we're about to uncover the most disturbing secrets in animation history, secrets that have been hiding in plain sight for over 80 years. This is the story of how a beloved cartoon became one of the most accidentally terrifying pieces of media ever created. Chapter 1, Blue Cat Blues, 1956, the episode that should not exist. If you ask animation historians which Tom and Jerry episode disturbs them the most, the answer is almost always the same: Blue Cat Blues. Released in 1956, this episode is unlike anything else in the series. It's slow, it's quiet, it's bleak, and it ends in a way no children's cartoon should ever end. The story follows Tom falling in love with a beautiful white cat. He does everything he can to impress her. Gifts, expensive presents, grand romantic gestures. But she rejects him. She chooses another cat instead. A wealthier cat, a more successful cat. Tom spirals. He drinks milk from a saucer like it's alcohol. He cries real tears. He loses everything. His money, his dignity, his will to live. The animation shows him becoming a shell of himself, wandering the streets in a daze, completely defeated. Jerry tries to help him. Jerry narrates the entire episode, watching his rival fall apart with genuine concern. But at the end of the episode, Jerry discovers something devastating. His own girlfriend has betrayed him too. She's left him for another mouse. The final scene shows both of them, Tom and Jerry, sitting together on train tracks. Not fighting, not chasing, just sitting. Waiting. A train horn blares in the distance. The whistle grows louder, closer, louder, and then fade to black. This is not slapstick. This is not comedy. This is despair captured in animation form. When people first see this episode as adults, they feel the full weight of it. Because it doesn't use violence for laughs, it doesn't reset at the end with everything back to normal. It uses heartbreak as horror, it uses emotional devastation as the punchline. And there is no punchline. Some fans believe Blue Cat Blues was a message from the animators at a time when the studio was falling apart. Hanna-Barbera were struggling, budgets were shrinking, the golden age was ending. Artists were exhausted, burned out, watching their careers crumble. The tone of the episode reflects a studio on the edge of collapse. Tom and Jerry don't die on screen. The episode never explicitly shows their deaths. But the implication is unavoidable. The symbolism is crystal clear. This is the darkest ending in cartoon history, not because of what it shows, but because of what it refuses to show. It trusts the audience to understand. It expects you to fill in the horrifying blanks yourself, and that makes it so much worse. The episode aired on television for years before networks started pulling it from rotation. Parents complained, children were confused, adults were disturbed. Because this wasn't entertainment, this was a cry for help disguised as a cartoon, It makes you wonder, why did the animators make this? Who approved it? And who was it really for? The answer might be simpler than you think. It was for themselves. A reflection of their own pain broadcast to millions of unsuspecting viewers. Chapter 2, The Screaming Woman, episode The Flying Sorceress. There is a moment in Tom and Jerry that viewers remember for one reason, and one reason only. The scream. In the episode The Flying Sorceress, Tom gets involved with a witch who owns a haunted house. Inside the house, strange shadows move on their own. Doors slam shut without anyone touching them. Objects fly across rooms. The atmosphere is thick with supernatural dread. And at one point, there's a scream, raw, human, and unsettling in a way that doesn't belong in a cartoon. Many fans say this is the single most frightening sound effect in the entire series. It doesn't sound staged, it doesn't sound goofy or exaggerated for comedic effect, it sounds real. It sounds like someone actually screaming in terror, the kind of scream that makes your blood run cold. The scream echoes through the haunted house as Tom frantically tries to escape. The audio quality is different from everything else in the episode, grainier, more raw, more visceral. It stands out immediately. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. During the 1940s and 50s, animators used sound libraries filled with real recordings, sometimes from accidents, sometimes from staged tests, sometimes from experimental audio sessions that were never meant to be heard by the public. This scream? Animation historians believe it may have been a real emergency recording, a genuine moment of fear captured on tape and then archived in a sound library. If that's true, then the animators intentionally chose the most frightening scream available, and placed it in a children's cartoon. Why? Because Tom and Jerry's animators loved mixing comedy with shock. Their goal was always to pull an emotional reaction out of the audience, laughter, surprise, excitement, but sometimes fear. They understood that contrast creates impact. If everything is funny, nothing stands out. But if you insert one moment of genuine terror into a comedy, that moment becomes unforgettable. And this moment proves it. Decades later, fans still talk about this scream. They share clips of it online. They dissect it. They try to find its origin. Some claim it came from a horror film. Others say it was recorded during a fire drill gone wrong. Nobody knows for certain. What we do know is this. The scream was deliberate. It was chosen specifically because it didn't fit, because it would unsettle viewers, because it would create a moment where children stopped laughing and started feeling something else entirely. The Flying Sorceress isn't the scariest Tom and Jerry episode, but that scream, that single, chilling sound effect, it might be the scariest moment in the entire franchise, and the fact that nobody can explain where it came from only makes it more disturbing. Chapter 3, The Night Before Christmas, Haba 1941. Tom shows emotion, real emotion. One of the earliest unsettling moments happens in the classic episode, The Night Before Christmas. At one point, Tom actually cries. Not cartoon tears, not comedic sobbing with exaggerated sound effects. He silently breaks down, his face crumples. His eyes fill with genuine sadness. He shivers and collapses into a state of raw, vulnerable emotion. The kind of emotion you'd see in a live-action drama, not a slapstick cartoon. The animators didn't draw this for laughs. They animated it with real human expression, down to tiny muscle movements in his face, the way his mouth trembles, the way his eyes glisten, the way his whole body seems to deflate with sorrow. It's disturbingly realistic. The scene happens after Tom throws Jerry out into the freezing cold on Christmas Eve. Jerry's locked outside, shivering in the snow. Tom watches through the window as the tiny mouse collapses from the cold, his small body going limp in the snow. And then Tom realizes what he's done. The guilt hits him all at once. His expression changes from smug satisfaction to absolute horror. He rushes outside, desperately trying to save Jerry, but the damage is done. For a brief moment, it looks like Jerry might actually be dead. This isn't played for comedy. There's no punchline. There's no wink at the camera. It's just devastating. Tom's emotional breakdown feels too real, too human, too raw for a cartoon that's supposed to be about a cat chasing a mouse. Today, psychologists who analyze animation say this moment stands out because it crosses the line from slapstick into emotional uncanny valley. The uncanny valley is a concept that describes the discomfort people feel when something looks almost human, but not quite. It's usually applied to robots or computer-generated faces. But it works for animation too. When Tom cries with genuine emotion, when his face shows real pain instead of cartoon exaggeration, something in our brain reacts negatively. We're not supposed to see a cartoon character as a real person, but here we do. It's a reminder that under all the violence and chaos, Tom is a character who can feel pain. Not just physical pain, but emotional pain. Deep, soul-crushing pain. Which makes everything else in the series suddenly more uncomfortable. Because if Tom can feel this kind of emotion, that means every time he gets hurt, every time he fails, every time Jerry humiliates him, he's actually suffering. The entire show becomes darker when you realize this. The Night Before Christmas was made in 1941, right at the beginning of Tom and Jerry's run. The animators were still experimenting with what the characters could be. They were testing emotional boundaries. And this scene proves they were capable of creating something genuinely moving, even heartbreaking, when they wanted to. But it also proves something else. The line between comedy and tragedy in Tom and Jerry was always thinner than anyone realized. One moment you're laughing, the next moment you're feeling something much heavier, and you're never quite sure which one is coming next. Chapter 4. The Living Doll. Nightmare. The Missing Mouse, 1953. In The Missing Mouse, Jerry becomes covered in white powder after hiding in a refrigerator. Tom overhears a radio broadcast stating that a deadly white mouse has escaped from a laboratory, a mouse so dangerous that even the slightest touch could be lethal. What follows is pure psychological horror. Tom doesn't try to catch Jerry, he doesn't try to fight. He becomes terrified, shaking, sweating, hallucinating. His entire world collapses into paranoid fear. The animators draw his eyes bulging out of his skull. His fur stands completely on end. His body twitches uncontrollably. His breathing becomes rapid and shallow. Every movement Jerry makes sends Tom into absolute panic. It's one of the most intense fear sequences in the entire show. But what makes this episode truly disturbing isn't just Tom's reaction, it's how the animation itself changes to reflect his mental state. The lighting becomes darker, shadows stretch across the walls, in unnatural ways. Jerry's silhouette appears larger, more menacing, more monstrous than he actually is. The music shifts from playful to genuinely suspenseful, using techniques borrowed directly from horror films. Tom begins seeing Jerry everywhere. He imagines the white mouse multiplying, surrounding him, closing in from all sides. His mind is breaking down in real time. This isn't cartoon fear, this is a psychological breakdown captured in animation. During the golden age of animation, artists were exploring how far they could push character expressions. They wanted to see the absolute limits of what a character's face could do. How much fear, how much terror, how much emotion they could squeeze into a single frame. Tom's face in this episode goes beyond cartoon exaggeration. It becomes grotesque, almost painful to look at. His features distort into shapes that don't quite make sense. His mouth stretches too wide. His eyes grow too large. His entire head seems to warp under the weight of his fear. This scene is frightening because it's the closest Tom and Jerry ever gets to body horror. A cat literally losing control of his body from fear. And here's what makes it even more disturbing. Jerry knows exactly what he's doing. He realizes Tom thinks he's dangerous. And instead of revealing the truth, Jerry leans into it. He terrorizes Tom deliberately. He watches Tom suffer and enjoys it. This flips the usual dynamic completely. Jerry isn't the underdog fighting back against a predator. He's a psychological torturer exploiting someone's deepest fears for his own amusement. The episode ends with Tom discovering the truth, that Jerry was never actually dangerous, but by that point, the damage is done. Tom has experienced genuine trauma. His fear was real, even if the threat wasn't. And the episode just moves on. No resolution, no comfort, no acknowledgement of what Tom just went through. Animation historians believe this episode was an experiment in pushing emotional boundaries. The animators wanted to see if they could make viewers genuinely uncomfortable while still maintaining the framework of a comedy cartoon. They succeeded. The missing mouse remains one of the most psychologically intense episodes in the entire series. Not because of violence, not because of death or destruction, but because it shows what happens when fear itself becomes the weapon. And that kind of fear, irrational, consuming, inescapable, is far more terrifying than any physical threat could ever be. Chapter 5, The Psychology Behind the Fear. Why do these scenes feel so unsettling, even to adults? It's not just the violence. It's not just the screaming or the surreal animation choices. It's something deeper, something psychological. Tom and Jerry uses a specific formula that accidentally creates horror. And once you understand this formula, you'll never watch the show the same way again. Formula Element 1. Innocent setup, leading to sudden violence. The show always begins with charm. A cozy living room, a sunny backyard, a sleepy afternoon. Everything looks safe. Everything looks peaceful. And then, snap, the tone shifts instantly. A door slams. A trap springs. A chase begins. The violence erupts without warning. This contrast activates a part of the brain that interprets threat. Because when a world looks safe, danger feels even sharper. Your brain relaxes, drops its guard, and then suddenly has to react to chaos. Animators in the 1940s understood this intuitively. They were masters of contrast, using calm backgrounds to amplify the impact of chaos. They knew that the bigger the gap between safety and danger, the stronger the emotional reaction. Formula Element 2. Exaggerated pain equals surreal fear. Tom being flattened, burnt, electrocuted, or blown apart seems funny as a kid, but adults notice something different. The violence doesn't always follow cartoon logic. Sometimes it looks too real, too physically accurate. The animators used real bone-cracking sound effects. They used real scream libraries. They studied anatomy-based deformation, how bodies actually bend, break, and compress under force. They created hyper-detailed facial expressions that captured genuine agony. This level of realism creates an uncanny effect. Your brain recognizes that it should be funny. Cartoons are supposed to be funny, but something feels wrong. The pain looks too convincing. The fear looks too genuine. The suffering looks too real. And that disconnect creates discomfort instead of laughter. Formula Element 3. The silence between sounds. Another psychological technique? Silence. Many of the scariest Tom and Jerry moments contain long stretches of quiet. No music, no dialogue, only footsteps, only breathing, only the slow creak of a door. Silence creates anticipation. Anticipation creates fear. This technique appears constantly in scenes involving dark basements, shadow-filled hallways, empty houses, abandoned atmospheres. The same trick used in modern horror cinema. Hanna-Barbera did it first. They understood that removing sound forces the audience to focus entirely on the visuals. Every tiny movement becomes significant. Every shadow becomes threatening. Every empty space becomes filled with potential danger. Your imagination does the rest. Why? This formula works so effectively. Combination of these three elements, innocent setup, realistic violence, strategic silence, creates a viewing experience that constantly keeps you off balance. You're never sure which tone is coming next. You're never sure if a scene will be funny or frightening. You're never sure if Tom's pain is supposed to make you laugh or make you uncomfortable. And that uncertainty, that's psychological tension. Modern horror films use the exact same techniques. They establish safety, then shatter it. They make violence feel real instead of fantastical. They use silence to build dread. Tom and Jerry was doing this decades before horror became a sophisticated genre. The animators weren't trying to create horror, they were trying to create impact, strong emotional reactions that would make their cartoons memorable. But impact doesn't care about intention. Impact just hits. And sometimes, what was meant to shock you into laughter ends up shocking you into fear instead. That's why these scenes stay with us. That's why they feel so much heavier as adults. That's why a simple cartoon about a cat and mouse can contain moments that genuinely disturb us decades later. Because underneath the comedy, there was always something darker waiting. And now that you've seen it, you can't look away. Chapter 6, episode Breakdown, Heavenly Puss, 1949, The Hell Scene. Every Tom and Jerry fan debates which moment is the most terrifying, but many agree on one answer: the Hell Scene from Heavenly Puss. This episode is unlike anything else in the entire franchise. It deals directly with death, the afterlife, eternal punishment, and damnation. And it doesn't treat these concepts lightly. The story begins with Tom being killed. Not knocked out, not temporarily hurt, actually killed. A piano falls on him, his spirit leaves his body, he floats upward toward the gates of heaven, carried by escalator into the clouds. Already this is darker than most children's cartoons would dare to go. But it gets worse. Tom arrives at the gates and meets the gatekeeper, a stern, imposing cat who holds a book containing records of every soul. The gatekeeper informs Tom that he can only enter heaven if Jerry signs a certificate of forgiveness. Tom has 1 hour to get Jerry's signature. If he fails, he'll be sent to the other place. And the animation makes it very clear what the other place means. The moment that crosses the line. When the gatekeeper mentions hell, the screen shifts. The animation style changes completely. The background turns dark red. Flames fill the screen. Shadows twist into demonic shapes. A train appears. Not a normal train, but a nightmarish locomotive belching black smoke, decorated with skulls and devil imagery. The Hell Train, they call it. This train is specifically designed to carry souls to eternal damnation. And the episode shows it in terrifying detail. Red-hot cars, chains, iron bars, tortured screaming faces pressed against the windows. The music shifts to deep, ominous tones, heavy drums, low brass, dissonant strings that sound like screaming. This isn't subtle. This isn't implied. This is a direct visual representation of hell in a children's cartoon. And then Tom sees something that makes it even worse: a document. A certificate written in bold letters listing his crimes against Jerry. Every act of violence, every cruel trick, every moment of suffering he caused. The gatekeeper's voice becomes cold. If you don't return with that signature, you'll be taking a one-way trip on that train. The camera zooms in on Tom's face. Pure terror. His eyes go wide. His body trembles. This isn't cartoon fear. This is existential dread. Why? This scene is so disturbing. This episode includes everything that should never appear in a kids' show. Death presented as permanent and real eternal punishment as an actual consequence. Claustrophobic imagery of souls trapped forever. Screaming faces behind bars, demonic laughter echoing in the background, a contract that resembles a deal with the devil. It is genuinely disturbing. And it was animated with more seriousness than any other episode in the series. The animators didn't treat this as a joke, they treated it as a morality tale, a warning about consequences, about karma, about the weight of cruelty. This wasn't slapstick. This was a religious parable disguised as children's entertainment. The animator theory. Many animation historians believe this episode was a personal project. The artists working on it were wrestling with deep questions. War trauma from World War II, guilt over violence they had witnessed or participated in religious upbringing that taught them about sin and punishment, fear of death and what comes after. Everything about Heavenly Puss feels personal. The tone is too heavy. The imagery is too specific. The emotional weight is too real. This wasn't just another Tom and Jerry episode. This was something the animators needed to create. A way to process their own fears and beliefs through the characters they knew best, the ending. The episode ends with Tom waking up. It was all a dream. He's alive. The piano didn't actually kill him. But here's what makes it unforgettable. Tom doesn't laugh it off. He doesn't immediately go back to chasing Jerry. Instead, he's genuinely shaken. He grabs Jerry, hugs him, refuses to let go. He's been given a second chance and he knows it. For one brief moment, the cycle breaks, the endless chase stops, and Tom becomes something he's never been before: grateful to be alive. Heavenly Puss remains the most psychologically intense episode in Tom and Jerry history, not because of violence, but because it forced viewers, children and adults alike, to confront mortality itself. Chapter 7: The animation techniques that make it horrifying. The terror in Tom and Jerry isn't accidental. It's the result of specific animation techniques borrowed directly from horror films, noir cinema, and experimental art movements of the 1930s and 40s. Let's break down exactly how the animators created fear. Technique 1: Expressionist lighting. Many of the scariest scenes use dramatic high-contrast lighting that comes straight from German expressionist cinema. Harsh shadows cut across characters' faces. Dramatic spotlights create pools of light surrounded by darkness. Silhouettes loom large against walls, distorted and stretched into monstrous shapes. This creates a noir horror aesthetic that feels completely out of place in a cartoon. But that's exactly what makes it so effective. When Tom walks down a dark hallway, the shadows don't behave like normal shadows. They stretch, they twist, they seem alive, crawling across the walls like something supernatural. The animators studied films like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, classic horror films known for their unsettling use of light and shadow. Then they applied those exact same principles to Tom and Jerry. The result: scenes that feel like they belong in a horror movie, not a children's cartoon. Technique 2: Distorted anatomy. Tom's face often stretches into shapes that shouldn't be possible. His jaw extends, his eyes bulge out of his skull. His entire head warps and deforms in ways that resemble demons, skulls, monstrous grins, hollow-eyed nightmares. Small kids laugh at these exaggerations. Adults feel uneasy, because somewhere in our subconscious, we recognize that these shapes are wrong. They violate natural proportions, they break the rules of how faces should look. The animators pushed facial expressions to their absolute limits, and sometimes beyond. They wanted to see how far they could stretch a character's features before it stopped being funny and started being disturbing. And in many cases, they crossed that line intentionally. Look closely at Tom's face during moments of extreme fear or rage. The shapes aren't just exaggerated, they're grotesque. His mouth becomes a gaping void. His eyes become empty, black holes. His teeth sharpen into fangs. These aren't cartoon expressions, these are monster transformations. Technique 3: Realistic sound effects. This might be the most important technique of all. The sounds in Tom and Jerry weren't created using typical cartoon methods. They weren't synthesized or exaggerated for comedic effect. They were real. The sound team recorded actual objects being destroyed. Real punches hitting real surfaces, real screams from real people, real breaking bones, or at least sounds designed to mimic them as closely as possible. Because the team understood something crucial: sound sells reality. You can draw the most exaggerated cartoon violence imaginable, but if the sound feels real, your brain interprets it as real. That's why certain impacts in Tom and Jerry make you wince. That's why certain screams make your skin crawl. That's why certain moments of violence feel genuinely painful instead of playful. The sounds weren't playful. They were recorded with the intention of creating visceral, physical reactions in the audience. Technique 4: Inhuman movement. In several episodes, characters move in ways that break natural physics. Quick stop-motion bursts where they teleport from one position to another, long, slow crawls that feel predatory and deliberate, impossible joint angles where limbs bend in directions they shouldn't. This technique appears most often during chase sequences in dark environments. Tom will move too quickly, faster than the animation frame rate should allow. Or he'll move too slowly, crawling toward the camera with unnatural, jerky movements. This breaks our expectation of how bodies should move. And when movement feels wrong, our brains interpret it as threatening. It's the same technique used in modern horror films. Creatures in movies like The Ring or The Grudge move in exactly this way: sudden bursts of impossible speed or slow, unnatural crawling. Tom and Jerry did it first. The animators were experimenting with motion in ways that wouldn't become common in horror cinema for another 50 years. They were decades ahead of their time. And they were creating nightmare fuel without even realizing it. Chapter 8: Why Kids Don't Notice the Horror. Here's something fascinating. Children and adults watch the exact same Tom and Jerry episodes, but they have completely different experiences. Kids laugh, adults feel uncomfortable. Why? Because children and adults don't interpret fear the same way. Their brains focus on entirely different aspects of what they're seeing. What children focus on. When kids watch Tom and Jerry, their attention is drawn to colors, bright, vibrant animation that catches the eye, movement, fast action, dynamic chases, constant motion, comedy, physical gags, silly sounds, predictable patterns, simplicity, good guy versus bad guy. Mouse outsmarts cat. Easy to follow, children process cartoons at surface level. They don't analyze subtext, they don't think about implications, they don't consider consequences beyond what's immediately visible on screen. When Tom gets flattened by a piano, kids see a funny shape. When Tom sits on train tracks, kids assume he'll be fine in the next scene because that's how cartoons work. Children trust the format. They trust that nothing truly bad will happen because it never has before. What adults? Focus on adults watch the same scenes and notice completely different things. Meaning. Why is this happening? What does it represent? Silence. The absence of music, the weight of quiet moments. Tone. The shift from comedy to something heavier. Implications. What happens after the scene ends? What are the real consequences? Adults bring life experience to their viewing. They recognize pain because they've felt pain. They recognize despair because they've felt despair. They recognize the weight of emotional suffering because they understand what that actually means. When Tom cries real tears, adults see genuine sadness. When Tom sits on train tracks, adults recognize suicidal ideation. When Tom's face distorts into monstrous shapes, adults feel the uncanny valley effect. The dual layer, storytelling. This is why Tom and Jerry remains fascinating to adults decades later. The show operates on two levels simultaneously. Layer 1, slapstick comedy for children, bright colors, fast action, simple conflicts, predictable outcomes. Layer 2, psychological depth for adults, emotional weight, existential themes, horror imagery, uncomfortable implications. As children, we only see layer 1. We laugh at the surface level gags and never think deeper. But as we grow older, layer 2 becomes visible. Suddenly we recognize pain where we once saw a comedy. We see darkness where we once saw light. We feel discomfort where we once felt joy. The show hasn't changed. We have. Why the horror becomes visible. As adults, we understand concepts that children can't grasp. Mortality. Death is real and permanent. Consequences. Actions have lasting effects. Psychology. Characters can experience genuine trauma. Symbolism. Images can represent deeper truths. These concepts transform how we interpret what we're watching. Scenes that once made us giggle now make us pause. Moments that felt harmless now feel heavy. Because now we recognize what was always there, hiding beneath the comedy. Pain, loneliness, desperation, fear, hopelessness. The animators embedded these themes into the show, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unconsciously. They created art that spoke to adults while entertaining children. And that's exactly why certain Tom and Jerry moments feel so disturbing when we revisit them as grown-ups. We finally understand what the animators were really saying. And we can't unhear it. Chapter 10. Why these scenes go viral today. In the age of social media, Tom and Jerry has experienced a strange renaissance. Clips from the show explode across TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, and Twitter, but not the funny clips, the disturbing ones. Videos analyzing the darkest Tom and Jerry moments regularly receive millions of views. Comment sections fill with people sharing their childhood trauma. Entire communities have formed around dissecting the horror hidden inside this classic cartoon. But why? Why now? Why does a show from the 1940s resonate so powerfully with modern audiences? Reason 1. Familiar childhood memory. Tom and Jerry is universally recognized. Almost everyone alive today has seen at least one episode. It's part of collective cultural memory across multiple generations and countries. When someone shares a disturbing Tom and Jerry clip, viewers instantly recognize it. That familiarity creates immediate engagement. You click because you remember watching this as a kid. And then the video shows you something you never noticed before. Reason 2. Hidden adult meaning. This is the hook that makes Tom and Jerry Content so shareable. The revelation that something dark was hiding in plain sight all along. People love discovering that their childhood wasn't quite what they remembered. They love realizing that adults see cartoons differently than children do. They love the conspiracy theory feeling of uncovering hidden truths. Videos that reveal the psychological horror, the disturbing implications, the nightmare fuel. These videos tap into that feeling perfectly. It's not just nostalgia, it's nostalgia plus revelation, and that combination is incredibly powerful. Reason 3. Short, powerful clips. Tom and Jerry episodes are only 7 minutes long. The scariest moments last just seconds. This makes them perfect for social media platforms designed around short-form content. A 15-second clip of Tom's demon face. A 30-second breakdown of the Blue Cat Blues ending. A 1-minute analysis of the hell scene from Heavenly Puss. These clips are just long enough to create impact but short enough to watch repeatedly and share instantly. Reason 4. Mystery plus storytelling. Modern audiences love mystery content. Iceberg videos, deep dives, lost media, conspiracy theories, disturbing discoveries. Tom and Jerry fits this format perfectly. Each dark moment becomes a mini mystery. Why was this made? Who approved this? What were the animators thinking? Did anyone realize how disturbing this was? Content creators can build entire narratives around these questions, turning simple cartoon analysis into compelling documentary-style storytelling. Reason 5. Emotional reaction. The most important factor, these clips make people feel something strong. When viewers watch Tom sitting on train tracks, or see the hell train coming for his soul, or hear that piercing scream from the flying sorceress, they react viscerally. And when they comment, "This traumatized me as a kid," or "I can't believe they showed this to children," or "This episode gave me nightmares for years," the algorithm rewards that engagement. Videos with high comment counts and strong emotional reactions and personal storytelling blow up on every platform. Tom and Jerry provides all of that naturally. No clickbait needed. The content itself is genuinely disturbing, genuinely nostalgic, and genuinely worth talking about. The result, a cartoon from 80 years ago, has become one of the most analyzed, discussed, and shared pieces of vintage media on modern social platforms. Not despite its darkness, because of it. The horror was always there. We just needed the internet to help us finally see it. The question that remains. We've journeyed through 8 decades of Tom and Jerry history. We've examined the darkest episodes, the most disturbing moments, the psychological techniques, and the hidden meanings. We've uncovered why certain scenes feel so unsettling. We've explored the historical context that explains their existence. We've analyzed the animation techniques that accidentally created horror. But one question remains, the question that started, this entire investigation. Was Tom and Jerry ever really meant for children? The evidence suggests something surprising, probably not, at least not originally. The show was created for theatrical audiences, adults sitting in movie theaters waiting for the main feature to begin. The violence was intense because adults could handle it. The emotional depth was real because adults could appreciate it. The darkness was present because adults understood darkness. Children only became the primary audience later when television networks started broadcasting these theatrical shorts as afternoon programming. By then, the content had already been created. The darkness was already embedded. And nobody thought to remove it. Perhaps nobody realized it was there in the first place. Perhaps the animators themselves didn't fully understand what they had created. A show that operated on 2 levels simultaneously, entertaining children on the surface while exploring much heavier themes underneath. Or perhaps they knew exactly what they were doing. Perhaps they intentionally created something that would grow with its audience. Something that would mean one thing to children and something entirely different to adults. Something that would haunt viewers for decades, lingering in memory long after the laughter faded. The truth we can't escape. Tom and Jerry is terrifying because it was made by artists who understood pain, who had lived through war, depression, and loss, who knew that life isn't always funny, that suffering is real, and that sometimes there are no happy endings. They poured that understanding into a cartoon about a cat and a mouse. They disguised darkness as comedy. They hid horror inside slapstick. And they created something unforgettable. Something that continues to disturb, fascinate, and haunt us 80 years later. Because the darkness was never an accident, it was always the point. We just weren't ready to see it until now. Your turn. So now we turn the question to you, the viewer. Which Tom and Jerry moment stayed with you the longest? Which scene disturbed you as a child, but you couldn't explain why? Which episode do you remember decades later haunting the edges of your memory? Was it Tom sitting on the train tracks? The demon face transformation? The hell train coming to claim his soul? The raw scream from the flying sorceress? Tom's silent breakdown on Christmas Eve? Or was it something else entirely? A moment we didn't cover? A scene that embedded itself in your childhood consciousness and never let go? Leave your answer in the comments below. Share your story. Because these moments affected millions of people across generations, and your experience matters. This is the dark side of Tom and Jerry, the side nobody warned you about. But now you know, and you'll never watch it the same way again.